the most important part of data science is not the technical part. The most important part is being able to explain what you did.
Welcome to the Housing on Ramp, a podcast for beginners, experts, and innovators in real estate and data science. This is where the Polygon research team and our friends share thoughts about housing, AI, careers, and everything in between. Today with me is, as usual, Greg Olivan. Hi, Greg. How's it going?
Hello, Alvin. Doing great.
And we have our special guest, the CEO of Finco.co, Salomón Muriel. He is a serial entrepreneur, a data science, a full stack developer. I know him as a teacher and mentor. How's it going, Salomón?
Hi, it's going great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So let's jump right in. How did you, become a serial entrepreneur?
Sure. So basically, I've spent the last 6 years of my life. I'm not too old. I'm just 31 as of 2 weeks ago. The last 6 years of my professional life, I've spent building companies, particularly tech companies, not in the US or here in Latin America. I'm from Colombia, based in Colombia, lived all my life in Colombia, love Colombia. And yeah, that's basically it. Finco is the fourth company that I built. First one was a flower company, which I ran to the ground extremely quickly in a spectacular fashion, you guys would say. Then I went into lending. So I had an online lender, which did pretty well. We sold that 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Then I built blockchain authentication, document authentication company that is blockchain for its tech that did okayish, is still going. And then Finco as of 2.5 years ago, which is doing great, I think.
Awesome. So, how did the idea of Finco, or how did the problem solving process of Finco start?
All right. So just for context, what Finco does is, well, its main product is that it's an automated valuation model for the real estate market. The way that it works is that we aggregate data from listing websites, kind of like Zillow, but not as jam packed with stuff as Zillow is or in Latin America. So there's many websites, usually like 4 or 5 per country. We crawl the data from all these websites and we use that data to simulate what you guys have in the US in the market listing services, because we don't have that here. There is no MLS systems in Latin America. Um, and then we using that we create our automated valuation model, which we sell to either the final customer that is buying or selling a property, or to real estate brokers that need some information in order to better counsel their clients. The idea actually didn't come from me. The idea came from my partner. His name is Oscar, and Oscar's family has been in the real estate business for all his life, more building than in the brokerage part. So in the construction part, and he wanted to price. His family wanted to price a building that they were just about to sell, so apartments in that particular property, and they had no idea how to, right? And when he went to try and find how to do that, there were no tools. You had to go online or go to the actual lot, go to the five nearest buildings and ask the price that they sold at, and see if that fit with whatever your cost was to see if it was a good business, right? So that's where the idea came from, right? He just had the need, and in the beginning, all we did was scroll the data. We didn't know if we were gonna do the automated valuation model yet. We started thinking about being an iBuyer, which is very popular right now as a business model, but we decided on the data part, and in particular doing the automated valuation model part, just because I myself work in data science for as long as I know. So I thought it was more interesting. So that's how we ended up doing AVMs.
That's great. There's a lot of talk here in the US about AVMs right now. And I think it'd be interesting for our listeners to have some insight into your thought process about how do you build that model? And maybe you can broaden the scope a little bit to talk about your background as an instructor, as a data scientist, kind of give us the big picture, and then how do you then start going about assembling your own software?
I ended up going into data science by chance. I'm an economist by trade, but I never actually applied economy. I never worked in a central bank or I don't know anything that needs an economist's macroeconomics knowledge. I think I forgot all of that knowledge. I don't remember anything about macroeconomics. Um, I started out working in multinationals in the marketing departments doing marketing research. So tons of Excel sheets, which everyone used to use back then. They didn't even let me touch Python in the first company I worked on, even though I wanted to. And it just built up from there. So I ended up going to another multinational, working also in the market research department, but I could actually get into the more programming side of understanding the market, just to automate everything. And then I ended up just doing a ton of data science stuff on my free time, and then consulting, and then well, here we are. I used it in all of my companies, I think. So that's how I ended up going to data science. And for Finco in particular, um, building the models has been something of a process as well. So in the beginning, maybe this is a meme in the data science community. I used to a neural network at it. So we had the data that we crawled from one listing website in Colombia, and just to see if we could build a model that would price stuff well. We just threw a neural network at it and see if it would work, and it did. So that was our first model, just a very simple TensorFlow network that we trained on the bare bones data. We didn't even clean the data, right? We simply threw it. So this is a thing that comes up in entrepreneurship a lot, which is to do things quick and dirty in the beginning, and then build upon that base. So that model actually was what we used to get our first round of funding, to get the first customers set up, even though it had many things wrong with it. So for example, we didn't clean the data, so it was extremely overfitted because listing websites have many repeats, many listings that show up 2, 3, 10 times. So it was extremely overfitted. It was extremely bad for the outliers. So there are outliers that should be priced okay, but that model didn't do so. So we moved from that, let's say, basic neural network, which is extremely easy to train nowadays with current technology, towards something simpler but uh, more understandable afterwards. So after we could hire a team to work in the data part besides just myself, we built our first ensemble model where we had a still a neural network, but also a couple of simple statistics models. So a linear regression and a logarithmic regression, plus a couple of tree-based models. So the typical XGBoost and LGBM. And we had an assembled that took all of that together. And then we also improved upon both outlier detection and repeat detection. And then we just kept improving upon that. So for example, back then we used an optimization algorithm that was built by someone else, an optimization library that is called Optuna, but then that fell short of our expectations for optimization. We needed to make it more robust. So we created our own algorithm. So now we do automatic machine learning, uh, completely optimized by our algorithm, and then we just kept improving upon that. The models that we have in the ensemble have changed a ton. Now it's actually a two-step model where we have one model that um, find the price without age for any given property, and then we apply an age correction to the property. So there's a ton of stuff that has changed. One of the most interesting parts about doing this is that it's a geographic problem, right? So this is not just data you throw at it, you have to take location into account. So the database that we use is not just the listings database, but we also have a ton of geographic information that we have to somehow get some meaning out of. So, for example, we using OpenStreetMaps data use a ton of the information of where the streets are, where the hospitals are, where the police stations are, where the parks, I know firemen stations, whatever you may think that is on a map, we use it for our models as well. And learning the geographic analyze the geographic data analysis part has been amazing. I had no idea about anything geographic before I went into Finco, so we had to learn as we went, and that has been, I think, one of the largest, let's say, skills gained over the last couple of years, where geographic data has turned, well, has opened my eyes in how feature engineering can be an extremely creative practice. Right, you can get a ton of data out of something as simple as just a little point in a map or a polygon in a map. So that's also part of the model as well. And interacting with the data has been extremely fun. And building machine learning models that include neural networks and all the other kinds of models that use this geographic data has been an amazing journey.
From our previous conversation, you talked a little bit about selecting OpenStreetMap among all geographical data tools. Could you talk a little bit more about how did you arrive to that decision of using OpenStreetMap?
Sure. So again, as an incremental process, in the beginning, we did not have OpenStreetMaps as a source. In that first version of Finco, we only had one source for Bogota. This isn't even countrywide. Bogota is the capital city of Colombia. So we only had one source for listings for Bogota, and the geographic information that we found was from governmental entities here in Colombia and Bogota that provided that information. So we had a map of the parks in Bogota that was provided by the Parks and Recreation department in the district, and so on and so forth for the rest of geographic information that we may need. So when we opened up our second city, Medellin, that's the second largest city in Colombia. We and a very nice city. I recommend that everyone that's listening to this goes and visits Medellin. It's amazing. When we did that, we had to find all the geographic information again. So the listing information we could crawl the same, no matter the city, but the geographic information was dependent on where we were going. So we had to go and find whatever we could find, and we found that the data that was in Bogota was not available completely in Medellin, right? So we had to build a separate model just for Medellin that used the data that was available there. And then when we wanted to open up our second country, not second city, when we opened up Mexico City back in August, we found that we would need to find geographic data just for Mexico City, right? Then we found the issue. This was not scalable. We couldn't scale the business quickly. We needed to go find geographic data that was just for that city in particular. And then we found OpenStreetMaps. So OpenStreetMaps is like a wiki site, but it's a wiki map where people uh, just complete everything that's around them in their environment to make a very complete map of the world, right? So, and it's a standard. So the same characteristics that you find in Bogota, you'll find in DC in the US, you'll find in Calcutta in India, you'll find in anywhere, right? So if we use OpenStreetMaps data instead of our local data, we'll have no need to go and search for more information or build new models. We can actually build a standardized pipeline that that trains on the same kind of data for any place in the world. So that's why we switched. The switch from the previous version to that version actually took us like 5 months to build, so it was not overnight. It was a a large project in the company, but it's what allowed us to be very scalable. So straight after we ended up building it, we moved everything towards that new pipeline. So now we had Bogota, Medellin, and Mexico City in that new pipeline, and in just 3 weeks, we opened up 25 new cities, something like that.
Wow.
And then 1 month after that, we opened up three more countries, just because it was so easy to. Right now, if I wanted to open up, let's say, a new city in Bogota, I need to train literally 2 clicks and the city is open, right? I don't need to go to look for any more data. So that's why we switched.
Were there any issues that the standardization that OpenStreetMaps brought didn't solve when you went from one country to the other? Are there any sort of impedances or challenges in extending to a new country that you can talk about?
Yeah, sure, and it's part of the, I guess, the nature of collaborative endeavors, like any wiki. Um, the information is not necessarily up to date and is more complete in some places than in others, right? So, for example, back in the conversation that we had when we're setting this podcast up, we're seeing how in DC OpenStreetMaps has like every particular building with its address, right? So you have literally everything mapped. In Latin America, we do not have it at that level of detail. So we have like the buildings, but they don't have the address typed into them. So it's less complete over here. And the same happens between countries. For example, commerce data. Commerce is extremely important. Knowing if you have, let's say, a kindergarten nearby to your house, that's an extremely important piece of information for choosing where you're going to live, right? Or a school or whatever it is that is important to you, a hospital, whatever. And it seemed that commerce data in particular was not up to date in most Latin American countries. So infrastructure worked great. Large commerce data, it was okay. So for example, malls, they were up to date. But given the pandemic, we are still, even today, if you go and find what's the business that's going to be at, let's say, 2 blocks from your place, it's probably going to be wrong because many places closed up during
Sure.
the
There's a
pandemic
lot
and
of
then
turnover.
something new popped up and no one has updated that yet. At least in Latin America, probably the US is it's more updated. So what that ended up forcing us to do was to, let's say, dismiss some of the characteristics that we wanted to use, some of the features that we wanted to use in our models, and try to find secondary sources of information that were also standardized. So, for example, for commerce, what is actually very up to date is Google. So we do pay the for the Places API for some of the characteristics that we cannot find in OpenStreetMaps,
Hmm.
which was something that we did not expect. We expected it to just work, and sadly,
Hmm.
it does have its fallacies.
Hmm. That's a great answer. It gives a lot of perspective and generates a lot of follow up questions.
To be honest, I think OpenStreetMaps as is going to be a huge part of the, let's say, humankind's endeavor of creating new companies. OpenStreetMaps for many companies in which geographical data is important. It's amazing. It's like having literally like when Wikipedia was founded. It's Wikipedia for geographical data, and it comes in handy for so many things. Not even just new companies like we are, but for example for government needs, so city planning and demographics planning and all the things that you need to have a geographic eye on. Usually you need to go and do a census or have people go and map out the stuff. Now it's just mapped out by itself. It's amazing. I love OpenStreetMaps.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that perspective. And we've had some good conversations about it already. I have a follow up question, though, with respect to getting feedback on an AVM, on an automated valuation model. It strikes me that there could be several different vectors for feedback. Direct customer feedback, either positive or perhaps sometimes people object to the valuation. There could be regulatory feedback, but perhaps the strongest one would be pricing. Perhaps you see that price signal coming through as you add more value to your AVMs. Perhaps you're able to capture more value. Can you talk about those constraints and the feedback loop essentially to what you're building?
Sure. So there's a little bit of everything that you just mentioned, just to go over the examples for each of those three, and I'll mention a couple others. The customer feedback is a huge deal. So, for example, when our valuation models, they're not built for mortgages, which is a large, um, let's say, a difference compared to most other businesses that do automated valuation models, right? Main customer for, I think, almost every other company that I've seen, the largest being House Canary or in the US, is mortgage banks for sure. What we're trying to sell is very affordable valuations for either the curious person that wants to know the price of their property, or for brokers that don't have the money to pay for a large amount, right? So we end up selling them for like right now it's about $3 depending on the country, a little bit more, a little bit less. So they're extremely inexpensive, right? Now, why is this important for the customer feedback part? The feedback that we get, it does not come from a bank. It comes from people that have some emotional attachment to the properties. So what you said that they do not agree with the price that we give comes up extremely often. That is not something that is rare. It's extremely common. Um, there is also another part which I think has been very interesting as a learning experience when we were building these things, and this fits in with the white box versus black box approach that we were talking earlier. One of the things that um, many people were not clear on was what is making the price go up or down, right? So for example, it just so happens that in certain areas of the city, older apartments are more expensive than newer apartments, because in that particular area of the city, the apartments that were built 20 years ago had more facilities, or they were nicer or whatever than the newer apartments, just in some parts of the city.
Exposed bricks.
Uh-huh. So someone goes and does a test. They try out an apartment with 20 years, an apartment with 10 years, and the apartment with 20 years comes up as pricier. Then what happens then, right? They go and say your model doesn't work. Actually, my model is extremely good, and it's so that those apartments that exist in that particular part of the city should be more expensive, but it makes no sense in their understanding of the world. So this is an extremely important learning experience. We decided on lowering our accuracy a little bit in order to make our models more understandable and explainable. So, for example, earlier we were talking about the age part of our models. Age, we force age to be monotonically decreasing function to make sure that uh, every year that you add up to an apartment will lower the price no matter what happens. So that happens on a second step on our models nowadays. Now we have several steps to them, and that way user experience is much greater, and we lost like 0.1% out of our accuracy, right? Because they just happen in very limited parts of the cities. So one of the largest learnings was that user experience many times does not agree with statistical accuracy, right? Um, that has been a huge part of what we learned. Second, there is also regulatory feedback. So in many countries, when you're evaluating a property, you need to have a license as an appraiser, and that's the case in Colombia. You need to have a license and appraiser in order to evaluate a property and say its cost. And you can guess the cost like we do legally, but you cannot say that it is a certified appraisal, because it's not, right. You're not visiting the place that you're appraising. That's the main need that the law requires. So there has been a lot of pushback from the appraisal community, the appraisal, how do you call this? Yeah, the appraisers that work in an analogous fashion, that actually go to apartments, uh, because they feel displaced, right? So we are working on actually working with them to make their works, their job easier, instead of trying to replace them. But there has been a ton of pushback, and since there is a law that actually, I guess, trying to outlaw us, there is some talks about uh, prohibiting automated evaluation models, that you have to actually go to the place in order to evaluate it. So that's something that happens as well, but that's just part of doing a company. Whatever you build, someone is not gonna like it, and you're gonna have to deal with it. And um, there's also, of course, a ton of, let's say, internal bias in the team. That's another part of the feedback comes internally. So when you are building something as complex as what we have now, incrementally, there's always going to be preference for results that you may not agree with. So, an example: I know the price of an apartment that I sold not too long ago, or that I bought not too long ago. So it is extremely hard to get some parts of the team, in particular in a small company, to see that maybe their views of the price of any given apartment, even if they don't agree with a model, doesn't mean that the model is wrong. It maybe means that they are wrong, or that the model has some leeway in the price that it ends up drawing, right? So that's why, for example, we give a range of prices now instead of just one price. Um, so, for example, my partner had the Oscar had a building that his family was selling, and they knew the price at which they had to sell given the, the surrounding area, and we were saying that it should be sold a little bit lower. So, just because of that disparity, he started doubting the validity of the models, even though we had all the statistical proof that the model was right. Uh, and that's something that there is an internal pushback as well in, let's say, having faith somewhat in what the model is doing, right? So that's also a very large part, and it's extremely hard not to do what you call sanity tests. So there is some apartments that you know the value of, and you just have to go and see if the model is hitting it, is anywhere nearby that value that you have in your mind. And if it doesn't, even though the metrics say that everything's right, you say something might be wrong, and you waste some time looking for um, doing a goose chase that there's really nothing to be found. The model was working okay. So that's also in a huge part of feedback.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What are some of the new technology that you're most excited about? I know you mentioned OpenStreetMap in data science in general, but also for Finco specifically.
These are ideas that we are planning on implementing. So nothing we have tested yet. Very excited on the um, recent advancements on OpenAPI's GPT-3 model. So it is a natural language processing model, which allows you to basically interact and prompt the computer to respond something back, which is extremely human-like. So it's been seen that it can be used for any amount of uses other than just talking back to it. So you can ask it to write a piece of code, and then it'll write it out in a syntactically well written way that will actually do what you need. So GitHub has this thing, Git Pilot, that they launched last year, which uses that model, and it's been my little tests in my local computer have worked out okay. So I'm very excited about using that for development purposes, which is, I think, something that will be great to have. It will save a ton of time. Second, the advances on image processing can be very easily applied to geographical data. So when you think about geographical data, all you are seeing is literally an image, right? So we have been testing out uh, a way of recognizing city limits by the actual map of a place. So the way that we do it now is that OpenStreetMaps has the administrative limits of any given city, but they are mapped out by someone. This is a wiki who are uploaded, and they are not always complete or completely correct. Many times the city goes farther away than the limits just because it has grown, and the limits have not changed over time as quickly. So we have been trying to find a way to calculate those limits with the data that we have, but that has not worked out great because the data is particularly sparse in the outer parts of a city. So our experiments have not been successful. But I think that with image processing, we may be able to do that. So if we have a picture of the city taken from satellite, we can actually see where the houses are stopping and where the country is going on, and then get limits from that. And there's a ton of things that you can do also using image processing algorithms for other purposes. So, for example, if you use the same kind of models for let me translate to English for um, seeing how. So right now there are models that you can use in order to, let's say, predict the next frame in a video, right? So that's something that is being used right now. For example, in video games, right now there's a thing that is very much in vogue, where if you want to increase your resolution count when you're playing video games, now there is a technology that comes in the newer GPUs where it will interpolate frames that are created by an AI inside the GPU. So you can use that in order to also predict changes in the market, but this changes in a geographical fashion. Let's say you're building a video of the market. That's something that we're also very excited about. Actually, we bought a 380 just for that, just for that test. It's also pretty good for gaming. We're all gamers in the company, but it's mostly for work. If it works, we're probably gonna do that. We're probably gonna do that. A little bit more. So there's a ton of things, right? Data science, and in particular uh, machine learning, has something new like every day. There's this channel on YouTube, 3 minute papers. Anyone's watched that? So
I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. You should look it up. 3 minute papers on YouTube. So this guy comes up with a new amazing paper of someone doing something amazing with in machine learning every day, and I just watch it and these ideas come up. So there's many things to be excited about.
So how do you absorb all of these useful information that later on feed into your work to building Finco?
I'm basically addicted to the internet, I guess. That's completely the complete honest answer. I'm just on a computer or my cell phone like 80% of my waking time. And so whenever someone says something, I just Google it up, and I'm on Reddit seeing what's up on the data science community. And stuff comes up, and I just read up on it. Something catches my mind. I go and do some technical test, and if I like it, I learn a little bit more. I don't know. I'm just on a computer all the time, so I guess you just absorb some of the things you see.
What about building your team? You've described some technical challenges and how you're navigating new technologies, but something interesting in your story was when you went from you and Oscar to building a team, and you've talked about some of the internal dialogues and even dissent that you have. Can you talk about a little bit more about how you have selected the skills that you're looking for in this modern day and age where there's so many choices about technologies? How have you gone about it?
Sure. So let's talk in particular about the data team. Um the Alwed and I met through a program that is called well, the actual course is called data engineering. Overarching program is data science for all, sure. So that's something that's huge in Colombia. It's extremely large. So Correlation One sells these courses to several countries around the world, and Colombia bought like a ton of spots for data science for all, which is a data science training program. I was already a data science scientist beforehand, but the connections that could be made through a course, I thought that they were going to be interesting. So I took the course 2 years ago, and actually my partner Oscar, even though he's a web developer, took it also just for um, let's say better educate himself on data part of our company. And that has been a huge part of our hiring pool resources for data, because in the program that we took, it was like 600 people that came out, and then it was 800 people in the next cohort, and then this cohort right now it has 2000 people in Colombia. So even though not all of them are amazing data scientists, to be completely honest, there's all kinds of people there. Many of them don't want to do data science as a full-time job, and they are not interested in being the best data scientist there is, which is okay. Some of them are, and it's very easy to find very good talent there. So for example, uh, just I think everyone that has gone through our data team has come from there. Not because we forced it to. They just it was just the place that we found the person that won out of everyone in the technical tests. And once we have that pool of talent, which is I think the hardest part of finding technical talent, having a large pool, it was actually quite straightforward. We just do technical tests, which are extremely easy, to be completely honest, to anyone that is knowledgeable in data science. It's just like training a couple of models, giving a couple of results, and like a 10-line program that they have to solve in 30 minutes. Whoever does it the quickest and seems to be the most comfortable with the tools, that's the guy that we need. If there's good rapport, right? If we also like him or her, if we feel that the connection is also there, like on a personal level. So if that happens and this person was the quickest and best suited, that's just the guy that we go for. and that has worked out great. So, for example, it just so happens that the people that we ended up hiring have always been the youngest, literally their first job out of it, and not because we're paying less. So, if a person had, let's say, 10 years experience, we're willing to pay for that experience. But it just so happens that the person that ended up doing everything the best was just the, let's say, I don't want to say kid because they're not kids, that are adults, but they're like 21 to 24-year-old adults that they just came out of university and they were so excited about data science that they have been reading up on data science for 2 years straight, and they're amazing, right? And they just ended up winning in all the positions that we were looking for in the beginning. So yeah, I think data science for us is a great tool for people that are trying to find data talent. That's somewhere that you should be looking for.
Yeah, that gives great perspective, I think, for our audience, who include a number of people who are just beginning their career and thinking about how to get into the housing industry or into a data science career. So I think that's very valuable perspective.
Yeah, I think getting into data science nowadays is getting harder just because of it's very much in the spotlight right now. So there's a ton of people just wanting to go into it. There's a ton of people starting to go into it. So there's more competition as when I started out. Um, but given that it's a technical field, the supply will never end up meeting demand. I feel like, or at least not in many years. Just the same as any kind of coding skill set that people look for nowadays, and data is just being demanded by everyone. So I think it's a very good idea that someone that wants to start out, they start out now. Um, even if just doing little exercises at home, like doing Kaggle. Competitions and stuff like that. Just that is enough to get you an entry level job in many places, just because of the amount of demand that there is.
You were saying the supply would never meet the demand. How so?
Well, data being generated, analyzed, is growing so extremely quickly, given the world that we live in, that the need to understand and analyze that data is going to keep growing. Maybe not the same pace as data. So, for example, you have the twice what happens in Finco right now. If you have right now we're analyzing 3 million listings per day, give or take, plus all the geographic data, and we can do that with the same team that we had when we were doing just 300,000 listings per day and just one city, right? So for sure you don't need more people to analyze more data, but the issues that can be solved with that data do keep growing. So for example, there's more people than ever going into tech entrepreneurship, so there are more tech companies coming out. um, there is more of a need to go into tech, into infrastructure for data in particular. So there's this thing, data ops, that did not exist 5 years ago, right? No one's talking data ops 5 years ago, and now it's a large part of many medium and large companies in their data teams. There's a ton of stuff that is happening, that is new in data analysis, in data visualization. So there's so many new fields that I just don't see the supply part of it, thinking about how many people out of the general population in the world go into tech, and if those that go into tech, how many go into data. I just don't see the supply growing quicker than the demand, right? Because to be completely honest, tech skills are extremely limited, right? Not many people are willing to be working coding in any given fashion, and those of us that are in high demand, no matter the tech that we're working on. So in particular, data, given that it's even more of a niche than, for example, web development, and web development is nowhere nearby having its demand met. Yeah, data is gonna be fine, I think. I don't have any statistics to back it up, though. It's just my opinion.
No, I think it makes sense that for us to get anywhere near that, the communities surrounding these younger people need to be actively invested in the education, like Colombia is doing now with correlation. How do you think about community, and how do you sort of incorporate that in your work as an entrepreneur?
Sure. So I think that's a great question. I like to pride myself in being, let's say, something of a jack of all trades, and in particular, that ends up showing in the fact that I'm both technical, so I can code and I write code both for the actual website part and the how we call it the data part of our company. Whatever it comes up, I can go and learn. But I'm also very well suited for selling and going up and networking and all the, let's say, more business side of things, right? And I found that having that combination of skill sets is extremely good for, let's say, growing in the community. So for example, just giving the example for data science for all, I took the course, and from the course, given the, let's say, networking that I did during the course, even though it was a virtual course, same as the one you're taking, I ended up going to being a teaching assistant and then writing the cases, and now uh, being the lead instructor for the data engineering course that you're taking. And that wasn't just because I was a good data scientist. That happens because I go and talk to people and I speak with them. So having being good at talking to people and being good at networking and being good at having people like you is also an extremely important part of being able to grow, right?
Hmm.
Because for example, the AVM models, they need to explainable. Even if it's a black box, you need to make people understand why it's a black box so they don't complain about it. You wanted to keep buying it, right? um, and that doesn't come out from the technical skill set part of it. That comes out from the more, let's say, social aspects of the work. So I think that that combination is extremely important, in particular for a data scientist.
And if that doesn't come naturally to someone, can you give us some advice about how to develop those skills?
I do believe that you should have the interest in at least making friends. I don't know if this is too simple of an advice, but just talking to people is what gets you there, right? Just talking to people ends up making you understand and being more empathetic towards other people. The difference between, for example, data science and web development or uh, any other technical skill set that requires coding is that data science will require non-technical people to interact with either the results or the process of what you built, right? So in web development, you just ended up with a nice UX that some designer created, which will be friendly because it is so by design. But many times in data science, the results are not friendly at all. And being able to, let's say, communicate better with others ends up being better able to understand where other people are coming from in the context of what you're building. So, for example, in Finco, we have our marketing team. They have to create pieces and blog posts and whatnot with data that we built, that we ended up getting from all our sources. And when that's happening, they need to understand as well as anyone else how everything happened, even though they do not understand the technical aspect of it. So back when I was working in multinationals, I will have to go and explain to the CEO of the company or the head of marketing some results, and I will need to be able to explain why the results were okay, even though I was not going to be explaining the let's say building blocks of how I ended up going into what I found, right? The insights. So being better able to understand other people will let you know what this person does understand easily and what he doesn't, where he's coming from, so what data he may be able to he may want to reject, and why you should be prepared to have arguments in order to make him accept the insights that you're getting. And all of that is extremely important. It's not just coding. It's not just coding. Mhm.
Really good description of that.
Who are some of your biggest mentors, and why are they your mentors?
I know about mentors in the way that most people understand it, as in a long term, let's say, mentorship relation. I think I've had many uh, shorter term mentors, in particular entrepreneurship. I found in the both the Colombian and the international community colleagues that have gone through the same things that I've been going through, building companies. And I found during certain periods of time that just being able to confide in the things that have been happening to me with someone else that already lived them has been extremely helpful. So, for example, there's the right now. This is something that is happening actually, an ongoing relationship. There is another startup that is called Alkylando. It means renting in Spanish. It is an Argentinian startup which is doing great. It just raised like a ton of money and is expanding all over Latin America. And I met the founders 5 years ago, 4 years ago, before I founded Finco, and they were just friends of mine that I met in Spain in some entrepreneurship contest. And nowadays they've grown their company quite a bit, and I want to follow in their footsteps. I've become friends with them, and they help me out with all the things that they did wrong, they did right. So that has been, for example, a current relationship. The investors that I had over the years have also been, they're usually um, a little bit older than me. I'm 31. These people are usually like 40, 50, maybe 60 years old, and they have a ton of experience behind them. So that has also been extremely helpful. Usually in the company that I'm building with them in that particular moment in time, with some of them I've kept in contact, with some of them I haven't, but their experience has been extremely useful. Um, my dad, I'm not sure if that's too much of a cliche. My dad is also an entrepreneur. His company is 20, almost 30 years old now, and he has also gone through many of the things that I've lived. So that has also been very helpful for general advice. Uh, More often than not, right? This happens almost every week that I need some advice. Um, so yeah, those are the ones that I can think of. Other entrepreneurs, the let's say partners and investors in my companies, and my family have all been great sources of mentorship along the way.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So you mentioned the internet in general, but can you give us maybe three book recommendations or recommendations for general resources, whatever it's about, for people who are looking to learn or just pick up a new book?
Book recommendations, maybe on entrepreneurship. I do read some. I have read some books on entrepreneurship that I liked a ton. So Traction is an amazing book, but it is very specific to entrepreneurship, not very much about data science, um, on how to grow a business, and it's been very useful in my uh, experience as an entrepreneur. There is also We the Possibility. I love that book. It's amazing. It's written by a guy named Mitchell Weiss, who is a professor, I think Harvard. Yeah. It's also not about data science. Sorry if it is not very much data science related. It is about entrepreneurship, but in the public sector. So, quick parenthesis: my wife is an entrepreneur as well, but an entrepreneur in the public sector. So she builds new services for the Colombian government, right? So, and she helps government entities create new services and let's say entrepreneurship in the public sector. And I found that that book in particular very much explains the mindset that you need to have when you're trying to build something new. Somewhere where building stuff that is new is extremely hard. I loved that book. It's very, very, very good, very readable, very interesting, has a ton of stats. I love it. And this is not a book, but on the data science part, the I think the most valuable resource on learning uh, data science, at least on the technical parts of it, is a website. It's called Machine Learning Mastery. I'm sure that many of the people that are listening to this have used it at one point or another. It's written by a guy named Jason. Here in Finco, we call him Master Jason because he's amazing. El maestro. So he basically built a website where he's written about every mainstream technology in data science, and with a ton of examples on how to use them, and extremely easy to follow. So I love it. That's how I learned using that website, how I built my first neural networks, I don't know, 8 years ago.
Great. Those are wonderful answers.
We'll make sure to detail them in the show notes. And lastly, do you currently live in your dream house? And if not, what does your dream house look like?
Okay, that's a great question. Um, I think that I do, to be completely honest. So there's also a quick story to that. Um, my wife and I decided to have kids last year, actually 2 years ago, but we ended up like really trying beginning of last year. And while we were doing that, we decided that we needed a larger place for whenever that happened. And we were in a smallish apartment, at least for our standards here in Bogota. It was like a 100 square meter apartment. One day she just said, why don't we look for a larger place? We wanted to have a larger family. And the first, I used Finco, of course. So I did this whole thing where I ended up going through all the places in Bogota that were in the zone that we wanted to live in, which is very nearby to our mom's houses. That's a huge thing here in Latin America, living nearby to your mom, so you can visit often. So they both live very nearby to each other, so we wanted to be nearby to them as well. And then I looked up which places were being sold very cheaply. So we had the price for every apartment in the city, and we also calculate the Finco price for any apartment in the city, so we can see which apartments are cheaper than what they should be. And I made a list of all the ones that were larger, so 140 and up, 140 meters and up. And the first apartment that we went to see, we loved it. So we saw like 15 apartments, but the first one that we went to see, we loved it. Is this nice duplex with uh, 4 bedrooms, very nice. It was being sold very cheaply compared to the zone for no reason at all, or than the owners wanted to get rid of it quickly. So it's a great apartment, and we bought it last year, and we're living there right now. The kids' room is already set up. We painted it ourselves. We have 2 nice terraces. We did a barbecue. Yeah, we love it. It is our dream place. So I am living there. In Spanish, we have a saying that is a baby comes with bread under his arm. El bebé viene con pan bajo el brazo. That means that whenever you have a baby, for some reason, luck favors you and gives you like everything you need to be able to provide for him. So it seems that that happened. You know,
That's
we
beautiful.
we found this place out of the blue, very luckily. So yeah, this one's huge and it has the terraces and everything. It's very nice.
Thank you, Salomon. This was a terrific conversation. We're so glad you were able and willing to join us. I've learned a lot just in the past hour, and really appreciate the chance to get to know you over our last couple of conversations. So again, thank you very much.
No, for sure. Whenever you guys wanna do it again, I'm always up for it. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was great.
We'd love to.
I love doing this.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Housing on Ramp podcast. Greg and I very much enjoyed learning about Salomon's journey, and we hope you did as well. If you like our podcast, make sure to follow us. On Spotify, you can also scroll all the way down in the episode to check out our polls and questions. If you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to drop your comments, questions, topics you'd like to hear about in the future. And if you have suggestions for future guests, those are also very welcomed. Finally, you can also give us feedback that I will personally read at info@polygonresearch.com. You can also find us on Twitter at polygonread, and on LinkedIn, we are linkedin.com/company/polygon-research. Be sure to visit our website at polygonresearch.com to read about us and the newest developments in mortgage industry data science. All right, take care, and we'll see you soon.